more and more women are taking the leadership of the working class struggle. And it's a necessary process. It's an absolutely necessary process. So many women from so many struggles, migrants, Black Lives Matter, the homeless, wow, so many different countries, Palestine. It's just, and there was a good crowd there too. For a relatively modest rally on an August afternoon, a very good crowd, a surprising crowd. And many of the young activists that are new to the movement were there. And it's always a good sign when they're drawn to this, because it's sort of, they're working with the more veteran activists. And that's exactly the way it should be. Comrades, I would be remiss if I did not note that this weekend is, or marks, the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. Most of us in this room are old enough to remember that. There's so much that could be said. What a nightmare, murder, the people who are forced out of New Orleans, people who still have not found a permanent home, what it meant for the Black liberation struggle. Many of us wish there could have been more of a struggle, but maybe now the Black Lives Matter struggle will play a little catch up on that, as in catching up for what we may have missed. I have to tell you that in thinking about Katrina, and especially how it displaced hundreds of thousands of African people who will never be back, it gentrified New Orleans, essentially, which is a big part of, a big goal of what the war against Black and brown youth is, the police wars, part of its gentrification. It makes me think of the migrant struggle. You don't have to leave the Western Hemisphere to observe the migrant struggle. Mexico, the border, Trump, etc. But you know, right now Europe's got its own Katrina. And it's this tremendous migrant struggle, primarily Middle Eastern and African migrants who are drowning in the Mediterranean, or who are dying in some truck, or are being forced into some concentration camp somewhere where they're beaten and treated horribly. You know, Trump is not the only one talking about a wall. Eastern European countries and even Western European countries are constructing walls to keep out migrants. And more, this migrant struggle is a big feature of the class struggle in the wake of this global capitalist crisis. And it's going to get worse. And that's, of course, the main topic of my hopefully brief remarks, how things are getting worse. I know everybody's busy with their life and with all of the activities in the struggle. But even with that, I know some of you probably noticed that, you know, world stock markets went down, you know, into quote unquote correction territory, which I believe is 10%. You know, the U.S. market lost 10 trillion. It came back a little bit in the middle of the week, but even the market analysts are not so sanguine about that, because they know it's just part of how erratic the market is. You know, over a period of a week, the U.S. market, and particularly the Dow, went back and forth over a range of 10,000 points. That's usually what it does in the course of a year. It hasn't traveled that range back and forth since the crisis of 08. I'm not saying that this is like, you know, September and October 08, but the handwriting's on the wall. The question, you know, is this the sign of a new global capitalist crisis, or the next phase, catastrophic phase of it? The answer to that is yes. Without knowing precisely how it will unravel and what the next shoe that drops will be, I think our sense of it must be yes. let's go over the causes. Of course, everybody's talking about China. Is it about China? Well, let's be objective. China is the second largest economy. It's the biggest importer of oil and other raw materials, zinc and iron, because it's been developing for so many years, so quickly, In a way, it's done a favor to the global capitalist market because it's been something that they could lean on, So instead of seeing it as the blame for it, I'd rather look at it this way. They maybe helped a little bit to stave off this inevitable global crisis for helping out. But even they couldn't do that forever, So don't blame China. Don't blame China. Is it the Federal Reserve, which is what the analysts talk about endlessly? Will they raise the interest rates 0.25%? Yes and no. Yes, there is concern that when the Federal Reserve and other central banks finally raise the interest rates, even a little bit, 0.25%, which is insignificant, more important is what it means. It means that this is the end of quantitative easing. This is the end of the life support that we've been giving the markets. But should raising the interest rates in such a minuscule percentage be the catalyst for a financial crisis? Not really. Is it about bubbles? Of course it's about bubbles. Now, what is a bubble? And bubbles are more important than they used to be. It's a permanent bubble these days. The value, in doing a little research, some comrades, perhaps like Reuben and others, they know this off the top of their head. It's amazing. The value, the global value of all stocks and bonds and derivatives and transactions is somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,000 trillion. Now, it's not real wealth. It's paper. But compare that value to the size of the real economy, the GDP of the global economy. It's less than 10% of that, maybe 70 or 80 trillion dollars. You can see that more and more the capitalist economy is dependent on finance capital. Actually, this is the definition of imperialism. And this is what we mean, or one of the things we mean when we talk about imperialism being the final stage of capitalism, when the real economy is so damaged and so in a state of overproduction that the capitalists must rely on propping up the financial markets. And their value is so much infinitely more important at this stage in the decay of capitalism than the real economy. By the way, that's the title of our latest Workers' World, I think. Stock market crash, symptom of capitalist decay. A really great article by Comrade Deirdre. Is it because of overproduction? This is an easy question. The answer is yes, yes, and yes. The global capitalist economy is contracting. This is not news to many of us who follow it, but they've been in a state of denial, and they don't start talking about the real state of the global economy until there's a market crash. Then they have to say, well, okay, yeah, the economy is contracting, and it's not just the price of oil that's going down, it's the price of all things, especially all the materials involved in manufacturing, and even consumer goods and everything else. And not only that, profits are going down. That's a hard thing for people to hear, especially as their incomes are going down, but it's true. And this is not new. This is the trend really ever since the '08 market crash. What makes this different? What makes this new phase of the crisis, that this market crash is the handwriting on the wall or telegraphing us what's going to come, whether it comes in September or October, and what other events might precipitate it. I think this is the most important thing. What we've lost in the communist movement to a large extent is the deep understanding that we should not only base ourselves on all of the struggles and all of the issues, but we should base ourselves on Marx's theory of the capitalist crisis. That sooner or later, and these days it's more like sooner, the system is falling apart. More and more, a lot of radicals don't base themselves on this. And it's really not their fault, because it would seem, based on looking back over several generations, 50, 60 years maybe, that capitalism has withstood all sorts of crises. It's weathered through this, it's weathered through that. It weathered through the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that it's sort of victorious, and that it's going to be around forever. And so in a sort of semi or even unconscious way, I think that a lot of radicals don't think about the fact that the system is falling apart, and we've got to take that into our considerations. What are we planning for? Not just reforms, but, doing the planet and the people a big favor, planning to overthrow capitalism. This brings us back to the real reason. It's the scientific technological phase of capitalist development. This has changed everything. And in a way, the first glimpse of that was the '08 crisis. What do I mean by that? What has the scientific technological phase done? It has made the productive forces available to the global economy so advanced and so organized on a global basis, there really is no such thing anymore as a national economy. Actually, the closest thing to a national economy is China, because China's got a big foot in the capitalist market, but it's also got another foot, fortunately, or hopefully several foot, in a planned economy. Not in the way that we'd like it, but it distinguishes it from the rest of the world. Because of this, no longer can really an economy, a global economy, based on capitalism, really function. Because now and forever, because of technology, it is in a permanent, not a cyclical, but a permanent state of overproduction. And it's on a global basis. Even if the population of the planet, or the size of the planet, was 10 times what it is, instead of 7 billion people, 70 billion people, with all of the stuff that technology can produce and the way that it's organized on a global basis, there still wouldn't be enough people to dump all the overproduction or all the glut of commodities off on it. This is the problem. This is the central problem of the capitalist crisis, and it's not going away. Here's the next problem, which is also unique, and it's linked to this big problem that I just tried to describe. Since the '08 collapse of the market, what has the capitalist government and the capitalist class done to disguise the fact that their global system is in a permanent crisis? The central banks, led by the Federal Reserve, have pumped trillions of dollars into the financial markets. That's what they called quantitative easing, but also keeping the interest rates low, actually rolling them back to zero, not only here, but most everywhere. See, the problem is that only works or only masks the true nature, the severity of the global capitalist crisis for a little while. And what happened in the markets this past week is a sign that the medicine stopped working. It really stopped working a long time ago. So there's more to come. Again, do we have a crystal ball where we can accurately predict the date and the circumstances of the next drop, or what bank is going to fail, or whether it will be Greece, or whether it will be Puerto Rico, or whether it will be Detroit, or whether it will be someplace that we're not looking in Brazil or India or Indonesia or some of what they call the emerging countries that, the capitalists were so excited about it, even though they were competing with them, but they also were excited about their economies growing. All of those economies are in contraction, by the way. We can't say that. But comrades and friends, trust us. This is the beginning of something big. And the real question for us is, what does it mean for the working class politically? What does it mean for revolutionaries and radicals and communists such as ourselves politically? We know that sooner or later, well, I shouldn't say sooner or later, that's not necessary, because with austerity and foreclosures and layoffs and evictions and everything that you're all aware of, the attacks on the working class have not ceased, even in this period of so-called recovery, bullshit recovery. But now that we're entering a new phase of a greater global capitalist crisis, what are the capitalists going to do? They're going to make the working class pay for it with more austerity, more layoffs, more plant closings, more business closings, more shuttering of streets like there are in Puerto Rico because of the crisis there, more evictions and foreclosures, and schools and hospitals closing, and people living on the street, and more of a police war, especially against black and brown people, and maybe other people. Because if they go after black and brown people in the morning, you know how it goes. They go after everybody else in the evening. And the workers will fight back. And a big part of our responsibility is to do what we can to help them do that. But that's not all. We have a sacred and profound obligation, especially now, to pay attention to the political and ideological aspect of the coming struggle. That is the struggle against capitalism. And I say this with as much earnesty and depth as I can muster. I'm not just talking about anti-capitalist rhetoric, which we may, shower in or take out of our speeches or what we write here or there, which is always good. That's not enough. Communists are obliged, in the wake of this global crisis of capitalism, to explain to as many people as possible, but especially the new generation of militant activists that have taken the street, first in reaction to the Occupy movement, and now in response to the Black Lives Matter uprising. It's our job to help them find not only an anti-racist road, which is essential and perhaps first and foremost, but also an anti-capitalist road, and they don't contradict each other. The struggle against racism must become a struggle against capitalism. See, there is a big anti-capitalist sentiment in the movement, especially amongst these young activists. If you listen to them, if you talk to them, if you hear what they're reading, you can see it. In many ways, frankly, they're ahead of some of the leftists of another generation, my generation, who I'm speculating, but maybe you just give it up after a while. You've lived most of your life fighting capitalism and it's still around, and you feel you're in, the December of your years, time, if you leave life, it'll probably still be around. And sometimes, not for everybody, sometimes that sort of weakens or muffles your focus. But for these young activists, that's not what they think. They think about having another system in their lifetime. And I'll tell you, if we don't understand that, if we don't begin to understand that, some of us older revolutionaries, it'll be difficult connecting to the younger revolutionaries. Now, for the most part, a lot of the anti-capitalist feeling and sentiment is based on the obvious thing. The enormous, horrible inequality of capitalism. That's what's fueling the struggle for 15 in a union. That's what fuels the whole 1% against the 99%. And these are great, ideas that help the class struggle and that raise class consciousness. But that's not enough. What we've got to do, in addition to support these struggles for reforms within capitalism, for better wages, for the right to a union, all the things that everybody here knows about, we have got to raise the necessity of a mass struggle against capitalism. There is a basis for it now. I'm not talking about us being on, the threshold of a revolution. Maybe we are, and we just don't know about it. We might be pleasantly surprised. That's why we should pay attention, because sometimes when you've been around for a long time, things tend to surprise you. But put that aside. We've got to do what we can. We are obliged to do what we can from this point going forward to build a strong anti-capitalist, pro-socialist movement. What everybody has to see, the class enemy, and especially those who are new to the movement, is that it is the communists, not anyone else, that people should rely on to hold the banner up high about the need to overthrow capitalism, the need to call it out in its name and to fight it. No, it doesn't replace the need to fight the individual struggles around every issue. We're not saying that at all. We're not saying that at all. What we are saying is that the time has come to raise the political and ideological struggle to a higher level. And I think that, at least for our party, for Workers' World Party, and our friends, and those who pay attention to us, or care what we say and think, not only here, but around the world, how to do this will be a big part of our discourse in the coming days and weeks. Thank you. With a tremendous party, more than 50 years old, done tremendous things on every question, especially the national question, imperialism, and embracing the struggle of the most oppressed, but also deeply rooted in the class struggle. I don't want to go on and on about the party, but we've reached a certain point. Other left parties that have been in existence, particularly in this country for a while, are at the same point in some ways, but because of their weak politics on so many questions, there's little, if any, hope for them. We are among the brightest, most promising parties that have been around, that are to some extent part of what has existed prior to this or that, or the collapse of the Soviet Union, or whatever, however you want to characterize the different epochs. The historical crisis is the strength of capitalism, capitalist reaction on a global level, for so long has consigned the revolutionary movement, with the exception of brief periods where we've been able to advance, into sort of a desert. So we're walking across a desert waiting to get to the oasis, the next opportunity to advance the revolution and all the things that come with that. Because of this, the connection between most of the old left and this new layer of activists, not just in the US, but on a global scale, I think is very weak. It's not the fault, and in one way, of the old left. No one can defy what capitalist reaction has done. The best that you could do is survive and not throw out your revolutionary program. Workers' World has, satisfied that objective, which is why we remain vibrant and relevant and can play a role in the future. But there is this disconnect. I hear it all the time. And the funny thing, and it comes as no surprise to me, and I hear it when I have dinner with the young folks that are coming into the PPA, I go to the events. They wish that the old left was stronger. Not just in numbers, that would be great. They wish we were stronger politically. They wish that there could be some way that the old left, which is supposed to be on the high theoretical level and supposed to be Marxist and revolutionary and, bring the understanding of the class and of imperialism and all the questions, they wish that they were there to influence in a very positive and critical way these new layers. But the fact is, for the most part, because of the state of the old left, they are not. And in that respect, it's another way that the party, even though we are small, sort of stands out. Because we have been able to make a connection. The question is, how do we build on that? Part of deepening the political and ideological struggle against the whole capitalist system is a big part of that. And in doing so, thinking of these new layers so that they're embraced, and that will take some thought and some strategizing. Anything important doesn't come easy and is not a matter of simply writing something or some rhetoric. What will make it effective is far more than that. But we've got to think about it. The Sanders development is important. Workers' World Party will not be supporting Bernie Sanders. We cannot support some imperialist politician who wants to tie the movement to the Democratic Party. It's not even going outside of the Democratic Party. I don't know, perhaps that'll be a phase that it goes through, who can tell? But I don't think that's what he's interested in. On the other hand, we are very interested in what's happening around this Sanders campaign. It is a sign that some section of the masses is radicalized and wants something different. And just what the comrade said, socialism and other things, they're not afraid of that. They're not turned off by that. So we as communists are obliged to observe this movement as carefully as we can to get a precise appraisal of just who is coming around. It seems as though it's mostly whites. If that's true, that's extremely unfortunate, because if it is not a movement, whatever other weaknesses it might have, where the oppressed are in the forefront at this stage of the struggle, then obviously it's going to be very, very limited. And it comes as no surprise to most of us that they weren't thinking about Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting and dynamic that activists in the Black Lives Matter movement made a decision to go there, to go to Saunders and say, hey, we're going to stand in front of you. We're not going to be ignored. From this moment on, nobody ignores the black struggle for survival. Nobody ignores it. Nobody ignores dealing with the police war on black people. And if we have to go and take the microphone away from you, or if we go to Clinton's, or if we go to any of the Republicans' things, or if we go and disrupt the Pope, or whatever, who's coming here, that we will do it, whether it's 5 of us or 500 of it. It's one of the interesting and powerful things, behind some of the activists in the Black Lives Matter movement. But Saunders' campaign shows that things are changing. And it should be a wake-up call to real revolutionaries. If he can fill stadiums, 5, 10, 20,000 people, whatever it is, on a progressive basis, on a quasi-socialist basis, however you want to characterize it, then what are the real revolutionaries doing? And why aren't we doing something? Are we just going to that'll be it? He's going to suck up all the oxygen right into the Democratic Party? I mean, what a trap. Where is he leading them? Are we not going to create another pole? Even if that pole is not quite as big as his pole, because it's not supported by a section of the bourgeoisie, I'll say this about the Saunders thing too, especially in the wake of this Trump development, which the movement has to do more against, I think. This guy is a fascist. He's a fascist, and he's like the French fascists, the Le Pens. He's like the National Front. Wherever you look in Europe, he's a carbon copy of these fascists. Some of them are very rich too, which is crazy because they're supposed to appeal to the working class. But he's a dangerous fascist. And I don't think that we should just let it go, but that's for another discussion. I lost my train of thought for a second, but the point was we should take Saunders very, very seriously, and I think that that's the only way that we can come up with the best approach to those who are going to his rallies. Now, some would be easy. When those activists from the Black Lives Matter movement disrupted him, I think it was in Seattle, I'm not sure. Yeah. Yes. This all-white crowd, they were hostile. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it have been great if there were some people there to stand up there with them, some whites? Right. Right. Why should they have to take that on? I mean, it's so courageous of them to have taken that on. Really courageous. I mean, you want to talk about going into a difficult terrain and being all alone with thousands and thousands of white people who are supposed to be progressive, and they're turning hostile to you. I mean, that's how sharp, this question of black liberation is. The national question, the black question, But we should continue to examine this phenomena and figure out the best way. Some, I think we just want to say, you shouldn't be going that way, you should come this way. Others we may have a different approach to, I'm not sure. But the best approach can only be arrived at through study, and we need more information. I'd like to know who's going to those rallies. I'd like to hear a tape of 1 or 2 of them. What is his rhetoric? What are his speeches? And to get a more informed idea of who's going. And I'll end by saying this, he is a creation of the bourgeoisie. Some of them are certainly using him to fill the vacuum that we should be filling. And we should be mindful of that. And we should feel nervous until we have done something that creates a pole, so that everybody doesn't have to go into that. But the bourgeois media is not covering him the same way they're covering Trump. I'll tell you that.
Right.
You know, Trump has a rally in the South, this huge racist, obnoxious rally in Alabama, you know, and they're waiting for him. They're waiting for him. They're covering his plane flying across. It's like they're all on his payroll or something. You know, I didn't see that. In any of the Sanders campaigns. It shows you that even though they're using him, they're still biased toward Trump's. These racist servants of imperialism and reaction. You know, I've been thinking about that a lot. We got a lot of problems with Bernie Sanders, but they're not even covering him anymore. You know, and he's drawing all these people. So it's a complicated question, you know. But we better make sure that whatever the strategy is, whatever the tactics are, that a revolutionary alternative to Sanders is everywhere, so that at least some section of those who are drawn to him, the better folks, the ones who do feel the anti-racist struggle and don't want to follow some white candidate, you know, at a time when the Black Lives Matter struggle and the struggle of immigrants is really the important struggle of the oppressed here and around the world. Yeah. They'll have a place to go. That's our responsibility, comrades.